Okay, seventh graders, we are now on April 26th, 27th. You should be in the folder for April 26th, 27th. That's where this video is. I'm going to be doing a video over this Chapter 3, Section 1, the first English settlements. As I'm doing this video, you should have a student reading notes guide that you need to be filling out as we go through this. So certainly pause the video when you're writing things down so that you get all the notes that you need. When you are finished with this video and you've taken the notes, go up to the substitute. She wants to see that your notes are finished, and then she will give you the quiz for today's lesson also. And then that will kind of end this day's lesson. Your assignment then, after you've done the reading notes and the quiz, is to read 3.2, so read the next section about the New England colonies, and also work on your debate. We'll be doing the debate for your explorers on Friday. All right, so here we go with Colonies Take Root. First thing I want you to do is focus in on this map. Okay, this map here is going to answer about the first three questions that are on your student reading notes. Another thing I want to do is just kind of foreshadow a little bit of what's going to be coming up in the future. As you can see, these are the English colonies in green. You have the French territory, so they're really not colonizing, and you have Spanish territory. We talked a little bit about this last week, but what I want to foreshadow is the conflict that's going to come in the mid-1700s, roughly 1754, between the English and the French. There will be a war fought right in this area here, mainly in this area right here, in 1750s or into the early 1760s called the French and Indian War. And it's really a conflict that the British and the French fight for control of the Americas, but more importantly, for control over in Europe. This becomes known as the French and Indian War. We may get to that at the end of the semester, or it may come up next year in your 8th grade studies. All right, so use some of these things here to answer your first few questions. Then we get into this reading here. The first English settlements. Okay, first of all, it does matter because as Spain, France, and Holland were seeking out colonies in the Americas, England wanted in on the competition. England wanted to be wealthy. And so they're going to go searching for colonies. And we've talked about the three G's like God, glory, and gold. Okay, and that's exactly what the English were wanting, and certainly not in that order. Okay, so as we get going through this, England is going to start seeking colonies. Now, as we know, England is a monarchy, which means they have a king or a queen. But this English monarchy had been limited going all the way back to about 1215 when the Magna Carta was forced to be signed by King John by some of those English noblemen. And through some of the centuries, the decades and centuries, some other people gained power throughout England, and they ended up forming a lawmaking body, the lawmaking body of England, known as the Parliament. Now, the Parliament sometimes had more power than the king, but most of the times the king or queen had more power than the Parliament. But Parliament still today is the lawmaking body in England. Okay? Now, what's going to happen is England starts to want to establish colonies, especially in the later 1500s. By this time, they kind of see Spain getting rich off of colonies. They want in on the action. They're ready to take on the Spanish Armada. You have Sir Francis Drake and you have Sir Walter Raleigh and others that they're no longer fearing the Spanish Armada. They're ready to go out and search for their glory, their gold. And then in the case of like the Pilgrims later on, we'll be talking about searching for God. Okay. One of the first attempts was the colony known as Roanoke. Okay. Now, the English are going to start in the roughly the 1500s searching for colonies, and they first attempt is going to be in North Carolina in Roanoke. Now, why did the English want to establish colonies in North America? One of the main reasons, was in searching for gold and silver, but also looking for opening up new markets of trade. They wanted to open up these new places that they could use for trading, and then, more importantly, I would say, is looking for raw materials. They were looking for raw materials such as lumber and crops and let's say fish and things like that they could send back to England in the Americas, send it back to England. England would make those into products, and then they could sell those back to the colonies or even sell those to other countries. So that was one of the big deals as to why they started colonizing in the late 1500s. Okay. Um, Now, Roanoke is the first attempt. Sir Walter Raleigh is going to do this kind of funding on his own, so he's taking all of the risk, hoping that there's a large reward. We've gone through the lost colony things, stuff like that. Uh, One of the things will be like John White will leave Roanoke uh, to head back to England for supplies. The problem is he's not able to get back for about 3 years because basically no ship was allowed out on the Atlantic Ocean because at this time there was a war going on between England and Spain out in the Atlantic. So, of course, John White is not able to get back till 3 years later. And by that time, everybody's gone. And, of course, we've gone through the many theories. You can have your own idea as to why the colonists at Roanoke were never found. We don't need to go into that today. But what this lesson did show to most of the people in England is that they needed to find a better way to fund this colonization movement. Instead of one person taking all of the risks and possibly going broke off of this, they started setting up companies where groups of these English wealthy men would get together and they would pool their money together, which would help spread out the risk of a colony failing. And they would pool this money together and fund colonizing over in the Americas. And one of the first groups that came about this way in 1607 was the Virginia Company of London. It's known as a joint stock company. I'm not going to really make you know what that means, the joint stock company, but it really is a precursor of how we do our stock markets today with companies and how they get funding. But anyways, the purpose of this Virginia Company of London was to settle colonies over in the Americas, specifically to look for gold and silver. I mean, there's your gold part for wealth. They also wanted to trade with the Indians for fur and use the lumber maybe out of certain places within North America, use that lumber, send it back to England, and the manufacturing companies in England would use that lumber to, make products that they could sell around the world. So roughly 1606, 1607, King James I granted the company, this London company, this Virginia Company of London, a charter. Now, a charter is a document that's issued by the government that grants specific rights to a person or a company. Okay? In this case here, it granted the right to this company to start a colony in what is known as Virginia. And they're going to do that in 1607. Now, a lot of problems happened in Jamestown. Well, and Jamestown becomes this first permanent English settlement in the Americas. But one of the biggest problems that happened at Jamestown is that most of the people that came there on the initial voyage, about 100 men, they could care less about setting up a colony. They were just in search of gold. And then they thought they could get some glory out of that too. So they weren't willing to do the hard work. And that's why very early on in the first year, very few of them survived this first year. Many of the colonists caught diseases such as malaria and they died. It was a really, really horrible time for this first attempt at Jamestown. This thing was failing, and this Virginia Company of London was going to be losing all of its money on this adventure. Um, they didn't want to do their hard farm work. They didn't want to grow crops. It was more about, I just want to go search for gold. Then I get my gold. I'll go back to England. They did not want to settle there. They did not want to stay in Jamestown. Um, you know, they expected to get their food from Native Americans. They didn't think they would have to do it themselves. Now, by the spring of 1608, so we're only a year into this, only 38 of these original 100 men are still alive. It's horrible how many of them have passed away or have died through diseases and other things. Um, then in 1608, here comes John Smith. John Smith is put in charge of this new colony. He's going to come up with a famous saying that is still used today, maybe worded a little bit differently, but he's going to impose this new rule called "He who works not, eats not." Basically, it means if you're not going to do the work to plant the fields, harvest the crops, all that type of stuff, you're not going to eat. You only eat what you grow. Okay? So instead of one person trying to supply all the food for everybody, no, everybody works. It's no longer just about searching for gold. We are going to plant crops. We as a group are going to work the fields and harvest them. If you don't, hey, you don't eat. And that really did kind of save Jamestown. All right. So that's where John Smith gets taken over. The next thing then is it's not all easy still. Okay, and yeah, John Smith, he imposes this rule, but doesn't mean he was the greatest guy either. We know the Disney movie and things like that, how he had some troubles with the Native Americans, and a lot of it had to deal with the fact that John Smith is going to lead parties raiding the Native Americans. Okay, and this is going to anger Powhatan. Powhatan is kind of the leader of the tribe that's in this area that started out helping the Jamestown people, but pretty soon realized these guys aren't here for anything that is helpful. They're just here to steal our stuff. And so then Powhatan and the Native Americans really are not going to be friendly to John Smith and the colonists at Jamestown. Next will be what is known as the starving time in Jamestown. And this is basically 1609 to 1610, where it's just a horrible time for the people at Jamestown. They suffer. The Native Americans aren't going to be trading with them for food. They don't have any crops that are worthwhile. And basically, you have about 60 colonists left over of the few hundred that are now there at Jamestown. They're just quickly running out of food and dying of diseases and things like that. Now, of course, Jamestown will survive. It eventually does prosper. What's going to happen is the Virginia Company does not give up on this new colony, and they will send over other leaders. Doesn't have to be John Smith. There's other leaders that will come across and help out Jamestown. One of the leaders, John Rolfe. John Rolfe will bring a new product to Jamestown. It's a product that had been grown in the Americas already, but he's going to bring a different variety of it, and it's known as tobacco. And he brings a tobacco plant that is going to grow there in the colonies so much better than it can in other places. So by about 1612, you've got tobacco being grown by the planters there in Jamestown. And this is able to sustain the colony. It's able to support the colony so it can keep going. This tobacco really is how the Americas is going to grow wealthy. Not only Virginia, but most of those southern colonies that come popping up. Now, as you get this crop growing and it makes the people of Jamestown start getting wealthier and wealthier, it brings more people to Jamestown. Well, now you got to start setting up rules. And this is where the House of Burgesses is going to come in. And you've got this here about representative government. Representative government, of course, is a form of government which people elect people to make laws for them. We talked about this in our Roman unit. Okay, so this is nothing new. Nothing new. And that's what the House of Burgesses is. It is the lawmaking body of Jamestown originally, but then Virginia, the whole colony. They will enact rules and laws for the people of Virginia. Now, there is this part right here about Africans coming to Virginia. In the summer of 1619, a ship will bring about 20 Africans with them. They were captured over and sold in Africa to the Europeans. They bring them by way of the Caribbean, and now these first slaves, as they're known at that time also, are going to be on American soil. And we kind of see this movement now of slavery that's going to end up being a process here in the Americas. Initially, it starts out pretty slow. We've talked about how Native Americans were maybe used as slaves to begin with, but that didn't work very well. There's another process called Indentured Servants, where you're taking poor people from England, promising them land over in the Americas if they will come over here and work for a specific amount of time, and then they can be freed and work their own land. But eventually it becomes the slavery system that will work out most importantly for the people of the South there. And this tobacco crop that's going to make the place very, very wealthy. All right, I'm going to stop it right there. I'm going to have to do another video for the Plymouth colony. It's not very long, just a couple pages here and stuff like that. So that won't be a very long video to finish up our notes. Okay? All right.